Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Today, we are going to be taking a look at all the new Natlan craftable weapons, as well as every single character that you can use them with to see if they are worth using. This video was filmed on the creator experience server, name not depending. This version of the game is not final and there might be changes on release, although it's unlikely to be anything significant. Please check the comments below to see if there are any changes. And the first question you probably have is, how do I get these weapons? So once you explore Natlan, you will eventually reach this Stadium of the Sacred Flame, and somehow you will get in here. Unfortunately, I do not know how you get into here, but once you actually do get into here, this is where you will be able to unlock them. Okay, so after a tiny bit more exploration, here is pretty much the entrance to the Stadium of the Sacred Flame. So if we just kind of go surf on over here, and then we head over to the left side, I believe, is it this one? Yeah, this one right here. And heading down here, we will actually be able to reach this guy. Now, I have no idea if we need to complete some kind of quest or anything to actually unlock this door or whatever, but at the very least, on the creator experience server, we are able to access it right here. And here we can take a look to see at what we actually need to get them. And just like Fontaine, fortunately, these recipes are all quite easy to get, as well as just needing these condensance crystals, which if you've been playing Fontaine for some time, you should have plenty of these, as well as, just some random like fruits and berry equivalents in terms of, resources here. So yeah, overall, this is going to be pretty easy to obtain the recipes for these. Now, there are some alternative ways which are really cool. That I'm super glad that they're doing this. So this is another alternative way that they've added for 5.0 for us to get 3 of the 5 craftable weapons, which is really awesome actually. This will save, obviously 3 billets from 3 different types of weapons, and we're getting the Polearm, the Catalyst, as well as the Claymore here. It does look like you actually have to participate in this event, so you have to come to this webpage and cheer. And fortunately though, the event duration seems to be from August 22nd to September 24th. So hopefully when I release this video, which is shortly after 5.0's release, you will be able to go here, do this event if you haven't, in order to get all 3 of these craftable Natlan weapons. We are now going to go through each of these weapons, starting with the Ring of Yaxche, the Catalyst. So taking a look at all the Catalyst users, we have Milani, Neuvillette, and Kokomi. And because the Ring of Yaxche boosts normal attack damage, we actually can just remove Neuvillette from the formula because his laser beam deals charged attack damage. So this leaves us with Milani as well as Kokomi as decent options for the Ring of Yaxche. And out of these two, obviously Milani's gonna, be doing a lot more damage overall than Kokomi. So the Ring of Yaxche is definitely best suited for Milani. However, for Kokomi as well, surprisingly, it is a very solid option. And if we look at this really old chart, now this chart is super old, so there might be some stuff that's honestly kind of outdated with this. You can even see that I'm using a completely different color scheme than I use nowadays for my charts. And funnily enough, in terms of Kokomi's normal attack damage, it's very, very close to the Everlasting Moonglow. So Everlasting Moonglow as well as the Prototype Amber both provide Kokomi with a lot of energy. So Kokomi, though, in all honesty, the only teams where she really actually cares about her personal damage during her elemental burst is on a mono hydro team where energy typically isn't a big issue. Although now that I'm looking at this team, in a full team situation, there's a really good chance that the Everlasting Moonglow still, ekes out ahead, because you're going to be super saturated on bonus damage with these 3 characters. Like, we're talking Yelan, we're talking Kaza, we're talking Fiorina. That is a ton of bonus damage for this team. So yeah, I mean, probably the Everlasting Moonglow is still going to be a little bit better, but I mean, it's close enough. It's close enough. Now, as for Milani, this is essentially one of her better free-to-play options, barring the Widsith, of course, but we all know the consistency issues issues with the Widsith. Now, me personally, I like the Widsith because I like big numbers. However, Ring of Yaxche will be the go-to consistent option, doing significantly more damage than a Widsith that's buff is down or with the attack buff. Highly recommended weapon if you want consistent damage output out of Milani for Milani. Now, if you do have a highly refined map of mare, honestly, the Ring of Yaxche at this point might not really be that much worth it to invest into. It's literally just a few percentage points better, most likely. However, just some food for thought to keep in mind. The Earthshaker is an attack percent craftable Claymore, and we also get one of these for free, which is really nice. But after a party member triggers any pyro-related reaction, the equipping character's elemental skill damage is increased by 32% for 8 seconds. What's really cool about this is that this effect can be triggered even when the triggering party member is not on field. So looking at this chart, we can see here that the R5 Earthshakers... My face is blocking it, so let me scoot this over. So we can see here that the Earthshaker at R5 is at about 80% of the damage of her signature weapon, so it's significantly worse than her signature. However, in comparison to her other free-to-play friendly weapons, which include the Event Claymore, Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword, which provides some extra energy recharge as well as a ton of attack percent, it does fall short a bit. And finally, we also have the Tidal Shadow, which deals notably more, especially when you actually have healing with it. However, you definitely want to avoid using the Tidal Shadow without healing. And in many teams with Navia, actually squeezing in healing can be a little bit tricky, at least consistent healing, because if you use Bennett with Navia, Bennett's not healing Navia if Navia's not under 70% of her HP. So there is that to keep in mind. However, this is another very solid free-to-play friendly option, assuming you're using her with Bennett or Xiangling to actually do, you know, some pyro crystallizes for her team. So out of the other Claymore characters, not only do you have to apply pyro, you have to deal notable amounts of elemental skill damage. And sadly, when it comes to those criteria, pretty much none of the Claymore characters actually fall into that camp. We do have Diluc, who does some of his damage through his elemental skills. And yeah, I mean, it's still not great because you're only boosting a fraction of Diluc's damage with the passive. And then we have Dea. Dea's damage with her elemental skill is pretty negligible, although she can fully utilize the stats on it. So there's that to keep in mind. But, you know, if you're using Dea, you're better off using a support Claymore like Favonius or Sacrificial, in my opinion. But hey, I could be eating my hat in this situation. For those of you skill damage main Dea players, I don't know what I'm talking about. So the next weapon we have on our list is the Flute of Ezpitzal, quite the name there. And basically this thing provides an astronomical amount of defense percent. It also has quite low base attack as well, which makes it gives exactly a nice 69%. In terms of Albedo, you know, either way for Albedo, obviously his skill damage thing here, the Cinnabar Spindle, is still going to be significantly better. However, you do have an actual viable free-to-play option. So because this thing provides a bunch of defense, it is actually a reasonable free-to-play option for Chiori, dealing roughly the same damage as a Cinnabar Spindle with only 5 procs. Now, it is technically possible to get more than 5 procs with the Cinnabar Spindle, which makes it outperform the Flute of Ezpitzal. But because of that, you know, in other words, if you don't have the Cinnabar Spindle, this actually becomes a very, very reasonable option for Chiori, which is great to see. And I realized I should have had the chart include the Harbinger of Dawn. So here it is. Here's the Harbinger of Dawn. And when it comes to defense scaling sword characters, these are literally the only 2 in the game. The last weapon is the Polearm Footprint of the Rainbow. And very similar to the Flute of Ezpitzal, it increases your defense by a ton. And in this case, a bit less because it has higher base attack. But we can see that using an elemental skill increases defense by 32% for 15 seconds. Currently, you know, this weapon is kind of designed for Kachina if you want to try to make her do damage. But the problem is Kachina's damage, for the amount of resources you have to invest into her, she does very, very little damage. Me personally, I prefer having her run the Favonius Lance to alleviate energy recharge issues across the entire team. Now, The other character who has a lot of promise with this polearm is actually Yunjin. And in this case, Yunjin gets a massive defense boost because of this polearm, because otherwise the only other option that provides her any defense is the death match, which doesn't even provide that much defense. However, this thing provides her a ton, and normally, you're probably using something like the Favonius Lance. So we can see here, sorry guys, this chart is not pretty, but I figured, hey, it doesn't really matter that much. But we can see that in combat, I tried her out really quick. Her defense was 2,604. And with the footprint of the rainbow, her defense shot up to 3,218, which equates to about a 23.6% increase to the amount of defense and thus the amount of flat damage that she provides to basic or normal attack damage based on her ultimate. So yeah, for Yunjin, if you can somehow mitigate her energy issues, which really kind of depends on your team setup, but let's be real, Yunjin has some serious energy issues. But if you can figure out a way to help her mitigate her energy issues, then this weapon will actually be noticeable in terms of the buff that it provides. So a nice small buff to Yunjin if you can somehow figure out her energy recharge requirements. Finally, we have the bow, which is another attack percent scaling weapon called the Chain Breaker, and it's got a bit of a longer description, but for every party member from Natlan or who has a different element type from the equipping character, the equipping character gains 9.6% increased attack. When there are no less than 3 of the aforementioned characters, the equipping character gains 48 elemental mastery. So this weapon is surprisingly a bit restrictive because not only does the character have to be attack percent scaling, not only does the character also have to like having elemental mastery, finally, the character must be on a team without any shared elements unless that character is from Natlan. And currently, well, pretty much very, very few characters actually fulfill all those conditions. Now, here's just one example, but if we have Tighnari on a team that fulfills all these criteria, which actually most of his teams don't fulfill this criteria, but let's say we do. We can see here that it is doing roughly about 101% of whatever the baseline is of this chart, which is the King's Squire, the other craftable weapon for a character like Tighnari. But Tighnari does scale a bit better off of elemental mastery than attack percent anyway, so perhaps he's not like necessarily the best option to choose from. But, he's the one there where I have the most updated and recent calcs for, so yeah, I just did him. In terms of the characters that likely have the best compatibility, I actually think it's Ganyu as well as Child. However, this weapon is not that much better than their other free-to-play friendly options, but it is an alternative to consider. So there you go. Hopefully this gave you a preview of the craftable weapons in Natlan, as well as just a few ideas of who you can possibly use them with. Now, what's really cool about most craftable weapons in Genshin Impact, especially for new regions, is that they foreshadow certain characters and kits that could come in the future. So I'm really curious to see what Hoyoverse has cooking for us in terms of how these weapons end up meshing with future characters. But here you go. That was my preliminary analysis of the weapons as of 5.0, right when they are released. Let me know if I missed anything or if you plan to use it with a character that I didn't mention on this list down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.